What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about Severance Season 2, Episode 10, Cold Harbor, the season finale. Man, I'm really going to miss listening to that title sequence music every week. Just the excitement that goes along with it. The new episode is out. I'm going to miss that. I really liked how this episode started the exact same way that the Season 1 finale ended with the "She's Alive" line. It kind of almost made it feel like a part 2 of that first season finale. So we're in the cabin and Cobell's talking to Innie Mark about the testing floor. And Innie Mark is just like, oh yeah, we know that place. We know how to get there. It's in Irving's drawings. Cobell seemed totally shocked when Mark started talking about how he already knew it. And that was strange. I wonder if it's just that floor manager in her coming back out, because it seems like she's pretty, for sure, not on Lumen's side anymore. They really seem to have severed ties, but I don't know, something to keep thinking about. We pop back over to the severed floor and we have Jame and Helly's meeting continuing from last week. And Jame's monologue here is just like the most Jame thing ever. I can't really think of a better way to describe it except very Jame. And like he has that line about, I threw a tin of candies, when he was upset about, how Helly had deceived him in the first season in the season finale. I just love the way that Dan Erickson and his team write the Egan's. They just have a very particular way of speaking. And a tin of candies, like it's just so ye olden times or something like that. Then when Helly finally responds to all that nonsense that's coming out of James' mouth, all she can say is probably what any of us would say. She just says, "God, you're f***ing weird." That made me laugh. That was a good one. Then we get this crazy line from Jame where he just flat out says, "I do not love my daughter," which, we've known that they don't have the best relationship. That's pretty obvious. But to hear him say that is just wild. And, we learned last week that he's sired plenty of other Egans, and he talks about how he doesn't see Kira in them either. He doesn't love them either. It's pretty crazy. Jame basically seems like he's just offloading all this crap that he can't say directly to his daughter, so he finds this loophole where he can say it directly to Helly. And he's just getting all this stuff off of his chest, essentially, where he doesn't have to face any of the consequences of it. And then Helly says, "Oh, you and your family built hell and you're going to burn in it." And then he responds with, "There he is." Like, so the Kier he sees in Helly is this fiery? I guess that's who the real Kier is? This definitely alludes to the idea, which I guess we could have safely assumed, that the Kier in the lore, the Kier that they tell the Innies about, is definitely not the real Kier, because of course Jame Egan would know better than anyone else, right? Also, this shot of him standing in the doorway backlit like that, it reminds me of God of War when Kratos is standing in the doorway looking at Atreus, and he looks so intimidating, he's so terrifying. It reminded me a lot of this shot here. You just see him standing there, you can't really see his face, it's just backlit. That was nice, I liked that. It just really sells how intimidating Jame can be. And it's funny because, the Jame we see later in the episode is like comedic relief. Like that one line he has, which we'll get to, is so funny. And it's like polar opposites here. And as we go back over to the cabin, we get this amazing transition, as always with this show. And as Helly's turning her head, Mark does the same thing, and it's just kind of a perfect match cut. I really like those transitions. They do them so well. And as Cobell is explaining this heist and how it's going to go, I really liked how you have this layered onion. We'll get to this later, but I love those spicy combinations of, we have Innie Mark and Miss Casey, we have Outie Mark and Outie Gemma, we have Innie Mark, Innie Gemma. There's so many combinations, I can't even remember them all. Mark gets to this point and stops on it, and he says, "Oh, well, if Lumen ends, then we end too." And that kind of starts to bring up the beginnings of this dilemma that Innie Mark has, where, any loyalty he feels to Outie Mark gets compromised essentially with his conflict of interest here. And what complicates it even further is they really are kind of using Innie Mark to achieve their goal. You see this in the conversation, the back and forth between Innie and Outie Mark, and even some of the things Devin says, that they really only need him to do this one thing. Like Mark seemingly doesn't have any intention of reintegrating at this point, especially when you think of that line from Devin when he says, he doesn't even think I'll reintegrate. And she says, "Well, you aren't, right?" Or something along those lines. And it really just kind of drives that point home that, he's right to be skeptical. He's right to think that they're not going to follow through on their promises. I mean, he barely knows any of them, really, right? Then we get to the two Marks, the Annie and the Audi, having their conversation on the deck and by the fireplace. And I loved the juxtaposition between these two, the lighting between these two scenes, and how we have the fire and the really warm lighting inside for Annie Mark, and outside we have the very blue light, very cold on the deck, on the patio. And just, the juxtaposition between the two was beautiful. It just thematically, it really drove the point home. Mark is in the dark, he's in the cold, he's looking to find Jemma to kind of bring that color back into his life, that warmth back into his life, similarly to how we saw it in episode 7, right? And so, that combination of the two was really something special. It looked really good and it worked perfectly. And we have Audi Mark start to win Annie Mark over in the beginning. He's kind of schmoozing him up and saying all the right things. And that starts to take a turn at a certain point. And Annie Mark genuinely appreciates his apology. And then we get another amazing transition, as the show always does, of, Annie Mark, he records his message and then ends up on the patio as Audi Mark. And it's just another good one. They're all over the place. All around, there's just amazing editing in this entire sequence. They have these repeating things happening over and over, switching from one to the other. And they find all these different ways to keep it fresh. They kind of simplify it, and then they just have the fading transitions between the two. And eventually we get to and then as we get these transitions between the two of them, where we have the two sets of chairs inside and outside, and we have, Audi Mark on one side, Annie Mark at the other. It's this great, again, juxtaposition between the two of them. Visually, they're sitting on opposite sides. They're kind of having this negotiation for the most part. And as it transitions between the two of them back and forth, it's just a great visual element. And again, really good editing to kind of speed up the process and not linger on the fact that they're recording these messages on the camera starts to kind of fade into the background. It almost becomes a conversation between the two of them as we switch from one side to the other. It was great. Kept things really interesting. And then Audi Mark finds these ways to keep me from rooting for him, make it hard to root for him at least. And he lies to Annie Mark about why he started the reintegration. He says it's, to get them out of there, right? But he's full of it. He only did it to find Jemma, as we know. So that hurt. It's so hard to figure out who to root for in these situations. You're rooting for one and then you're rooting for the other. And I'm curious to see if we end up in a situation, maybe in future seasons, where we have Annie Mark and Audi Mark on opposing sides indefinitely, where maybe they become each other's villains. Maybe Lumen isn't even the primary villain anymore, or maybe a secondary villain or something. But I really like that idea of the two protagonists of the show that are the same person are also each other's antagonists. I feel like that could get really interesting in future seasons. I hope they kind of dive into that deeper. But we get to see that, Audi Mark really has no intention of sharing his life with Annie Mark. The reintegration stuff is over, at least for now, and he doesn't really have any motivations, especially now that Jemma's out, to continue with it. So I don't think he has, any intention of sharing anything with Annie Mark. So he really is just manipulating him at this point. And it's kind of sad because, Annie Mark and all the Annies are kind of like kids. In this season, maybe more so like teenagers. But that makes them easier to manipulate. And that's kind of what Audi Mark is playing on. Audi Mark really starts to mess up. He loses Annie Mark as soon as he calls Helly Heleny. And that really, struck a chord with Annie Mark. And it reminded me a lot of the scene in the Chinese restaurant when Helena comes to speak with Audi Mark. And when she calls Jemma Hannah, that's the moment that really strikes a chord with Mark and rubs him the wrong way. And the moment after that happens, he leaves the restaurant and goes and dives headfirst into reintegration. So that was another great callback there, between these two separate situations that kind of had the same result, pretty much. Then when we have that final shot of the conversation where Mark just says no, and you have that fire burning over his shoulder in the background, just perfect framing. That was just pure cinema. That was so good. I loved that. That was a really nice touch. Then we get one last beautiful transition, a severed transition between Mark leaving the cabin and ending up on the severed floor where you have these elevator doors coming in. Man, I've said this before, but they're so good at this stuff. Oh, it's like one of my favorite parts of the show, pretty much. But that's probably just the editor in me. Then as we come out of the elevator on the severed floor, we get this huge painting on the wall that, shows Mark finishing Cold Harbor, and everyone he's ever known, anyone who's been a part of the process is in this painting. And you have the Eagons standing on the same waterfall from Woe's Hollow, lording over them essentially. And it's a very religious painting. It seems like something you'd see on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel or something like that. And we get this amazing production design. They've done it before, but this is kind of the icing on the cake of these lights that are guiding Helly and Mark to MDR, where they have a lot waiting for them there. The Kier statue shows back up in a very interesting way. And they have a lot of fun with this. And then you realize, oh man, this is going to be good. Whenever the Kier statue's there, it's going to be good. And then we find out it's animatronic on top of it, so it's kind of just even better. Another one of my favorite parts of the episode too, as we go over to Dylan and Seth, when he hands him the note from himself, from Dylan to Dylan, and he's about to read it, and Seth's talking about how he has, stuff to do, he's swamped, and he slides it over the table, and then it just cuts to, Milchick's face, and he turns around and sprints out of the room. That was so funny. I actually laughed out loud when that part happened. I liked that. That was nice. And as we come back over to Mark and Helly, and, they're debating whether or not they should do it and what the plan should be and the pros and cons of it all. And then, Helly says something about Mark reintegrating. He's like, yeah, but he could be a total liar. And it just sounded like something a kid would say. I love when they do that stuff, when they make the innies, seem like kids. It's just so endearing. And we get some sweet moments here between, Helly and Mark and Dylan. And, it was endearing. It was sweet. It's nice to have kind of a change of pace, before this big event's going to happen. That's going to kind of rip everybody's lives up from the root. The whole sequence with animatronic Kier and Milchick was just so hilarious. It had that Severance, quirkiness to it. They do this whole stand-up routine. And as, animatronic Kier is introducing Milchick, there's this music that's playing, and it cuts out right before the cheering and laughter starts before he comes in. And I liked that, just kind of, rough around the edges. Like there's just somebody, running the PA in the back room, not doing a very good job. There's no polish to it. I liked that touch there. And then we get that, line from Kier where he says, you're verbose. And you can tell there's just some animosity between whoever's operating the Kier animatronic and Milchick. Maybe it's just, it doesn't seem like it would be Drummond. I guess it could be. I can't remember where he is at this point in the story. But whoever it is, they're obviously not a very big fan of Seth. And then when Seth gets kind of annoyed and kind of chirps back at the Kier animatronic, and he talks about how it's 5 inches taller than Kier actually was. And then the voice, there's a long pause, and the voice changes. And it's just like, thank you for that feedback, Seth. And it reminded me of the way Irving said it in Woe's Hollow right before he got, his innie got killed. That stuck out to me. That was definitely funny. And then as Seth is walking away, dragging the Kier statue and the spotlight shining on him, and, you just see him walking away, and he has that big corporate smile that he's so good at. That was pretty funny too. That was another highlight of the episode for me. I love those little tiny elements that are stuck in there that kind of just add to the whole thing. And yeah, whenever you have Milchick's corporate smile, it puts a smile on my face. Then we get our girl Gwendolyn Christie showing up with a baby goat. We finally find out what the goats are for, if there's not more that they're used for, but this seems like it's probably it. And they make sacrifices as they finish these big projects, I assume. They kill the person that they're testing on, and they kill the goat, and they bury them together. Very Lumen, very culty. I loved Gwendolyn Christie's ceremonial garb she's wearing. She has her hair up in that tight braided bun, and it reminded me of maybe something Dutch, some kind of European culture, traditional culture. I live in Poland. My wife's Polish, and it reminds me of, I can't remember the name of them, but the mountain people here, that's what they call them, the mountain people. They wear similar kind of almost lederhosen-esque stuff, right? Like you'd see in Germany. And that's just exactly what her clothes reminded me of. And yeah, that gave me a good laugh too. Then as they go into the room and start the whole sacrificial process, they were reciting these lines and all this stuff. The highlight of that part for me was, when Drummond goes over to that, hole in the wall with the gun in it, and he like flicked a switch and the bullet came out that triggers the hammer that knocks the thing into the goat's brain, and then later Drummond's neck. And I loved those little tiny elements of the production design where he like flicks the switch. It's almost like he's inserting a quarter into like one of those 25-cent gumball machines, and then a little bullet falls out. I thought that was pretty funny. I love that production design stuff. And then as Mark gets caught outside the room and Drummond comes out, grabs him by the neck, throws him against the wall, and he just does this really quick punch, this guttural, fast, hardcore punch. I don't know why it seemed so effective, but it made me think of this documentary I saw for the first Last of Us game, and the one they made in 2013. And they talk about how, if they cut out a few frames of a punch when Joel's knocking some guy out, it makes it way more effective. It just seems more visceral when it just follows through, and it's just faster than the camera's rolling, faster than the frame rate, just unnatural seeming, but it gives it that visceral feeling. And it reminded me of this. I'm curious if that's what they did here. They may not have. It might have just been a fast punch. But yeah, that came to mind at this point because it just was so visceral. It was awesome. Sometimes cutting a few frames out of a punch just makes it hit harder. And now we finally hear where Adam Scott was talking about in all the promotional material how he got a concussion and he couldn't talk about when it happened. Well, it ended up being in the finale, and they talk about it in the Severance podcast. But I guess his arm got caught, and Drummond's whipping him around when he hits his head against the wall. He probably was supposed to put his hands up or something, and he didn't. And you see it's the take in the show, and his head just hits the wall so hard, and then they cut away right away because he's probably like, oh God, that actually hurt. But yeah, they cut away, and you don't get to see any more of the aftermath. But that's where his concussion came from. Then Our Lady from Mammalion's Nurturable comes in, saves Mark, and kicks Drummond's ass. And as Mark and Drummond head downstairs, when they have the Severed transition in the elevator, and we know their eyes flutter and their pupils dilate, maybe their muscles tighten up too or something like that. But yeah, he pulls the trigger as he transitions, and oh my God, just that with that design of that gun, it just, the way it goes into his neck and all the blood, there's so much blood that comes out of his neck. That the whole scene was just so shocking. We don't really see anything like that in the show. The most brutal thing we've seen up to now is Grainer's death in the first season. So it's been a while, but this was definitely way more brutal than what Ragabi did then. But yeah, I just loved how Drummond's death ended up being accidental because he's this big villain in the show, this big antagonist, and it's just like, oh, oops. Then later on, as Mark and Jame are escaping, I love how he doors the elevator door, so that they can get back out. So I was thinking about that. I don't think they would have been able to get back out. Maybe if they, maybe if he killed or knocked out Mauer when he's running after them, he could have taken his card or something. But that was a really convenient way to escape the testing floor. Then we find out what Gemma's doing in the Cold Harbor room, and she's disassembling the same crib that Mark disassembled not long before, she ended up dying. But yeah, we find out that Cold Harbor is basically the final boss of Severance testing. And unfortunately, this Severed test ends up failing, but not because of the technology failing, just because Mark shows up at the right time. They're really just trying to test the bounds of Severance to see how far it can go. Similarly to season 1, when they had Miss Casey and Mark, meeting, and the candles burning, Gemma's candle, and Miss Cobell's watching them. It's very similar here, although this time the ante's upped because there's not many connections that are more powerful than a mother and their child. And even though Jemma miscarried, that all that's built in. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, this really is an effective final test, for Lumen to see if this stuff really works. It was pretty funny when Mark is trying to get the nurse to open the door. I can't remember her name. And he's like chasing her around, pointing this gun that has no, triggering bullet to shoot the piston out anymore. So it's useless anyway, except maybe it is to hit somebody. And he's just like chasing her around, and they're like swearing at each other. That was pretty good. And then she just runs off, and he finds his own way to get in. But yeah, Mark and Gemma's reunion here was totally awesome. It was incredible. What a good payoff. We get kind of Mark's reaction at first, and then we get the two of them together when they leave the room. And that was probably the best part, to have Audi Mark and Audi Jemma having that reunion there. That was nice. But yeah, like I was saying before, just all these different combinations of their consciousnesses that are, making their way through the building as they go one floor to another, in one room, out another. all the way till they get to the stairwell. That was just such a nice touch. It made the whole heist thing that much more interesting, that much more engaging. That was really cool to have that extra layer to it. Then we get the best part of the episode, Jame Egan saying, "Oh, fuck." I'm sure everybody else is going to agree with this one, but that was just so funny. The way he delivered that line. Again, the way they write for Jame, the actor that portrays him, the way he delivers his lines, it's just pure cinema. It's perfect. As the alarms are going off and we're back in MDR, we get, Britt Lauer's perfect performance where she looks up, she realizes what's happening, then her face changes. Her, these micro expressions on her face change to, oh shit, like realizing what's happening and the implications of that. Mark found Gemma, he got her out, but that means this is really happening. Mark and I can never be together again, or so she thinks. What does Mauer mean when he says you'll kill them all? My best guess is he's talking about all the innies, and because this is happening, because Lumen's gonna most likely fall apart as Gemma gets out and reveals all this to the world, that Lumen shuts down and all the innies are gone. So I assume that's what he means. Maybe that alludes to a future storyline for next season or the one after, or whatever, where, Innie Mark and Helly are trying to get all the innies out, find a way for them. I don't even know how they would do that. That's interesting. I guess we'll have to wait and see. It was pretty hilarious as they're going up the elevator and, they switch over and it's Miss Casey and Innie Mark and they're just making out. Neither of them really knows why. And I forget what line she has exactly, but she just says, "What is happening?" or something like that. And that was pretty funny. That was a good, another one of those good moments. Then we get a great final moment from Dylan. He's standing there facing off against Mr. Milchick. He's got the marching band backing him up. And then Seth jumps up onto the vending machine like a supervillain. He's like, crouched there like he's Spider-Man or something. I thought that was pretty funny. And then he just says, "Fuck you, Mr. Milchick." That was a nice kind of one last, boom, right there to Seth. Then we get that final choice from Mark. I don't really blame him for the choice he made. I could understand, I can empathize with him. Like, you have no relationship with Gemma. You're just kind of doing it out of duty to your outie, who is, I think he realizes, manipulating him to a certain extent too. So he's like, it's very short-sighted because, as Cobell says, like, what are him and Helly going to do? They're going to go to the equator, as they say, but they can't leave the building and still be themselves. So where are they going to run to? How are they going to hide? Maybe we'll see that next season. Maybe they do find a way to, go deeper into Lumen and discover more things and stay hidden from them. But we'll have to see how that works. I'm sure Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller and everybody will figure that out, make it interesting. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see there. But it was cute. They were like teenagers, running off together into the sunset, running away from home, essentially. We get that last kind of montage sequence of them running down all these hallways. And then we come on that last freeze frame. And, with the music and everything, and then that kind of slow zoom in on that freeze frame, it felt very 70s to me, like something you would see in a 70s, Las Vegas heist movie or something like that. I'm bummed that Milchick's disillusionment from Lumen didn't really amount to anything this season. I'm sure they're just laying the groundwork for the future for next season, which, that's good storytelling. I get it. But, it really felt like maybe something should have come at it. Some kind of turncoat should have happened with him at the end here. But he ended up staying an antagonist to the innies. But yeah, I guess we'll just see that next season. I'm also bummed we didn't get to see any more of Rickon this season. We got very little of him. I get it. It just wasn't in the story there. When they're writing it, they just couldn't find a way to work him in. But it was interesting because we didn't really get to see what came of his conversations with Natalie. I think that he wrote the fourth appendix for the Woe's Hollow episode, and that's kind of where they were going with that. But maybe this is, again, just, laying the groundwork for something that's going to happen in the future, some sort of team up between, Rickon and Lumen. But everybody loves Rickon. It would have been nice to get more of him, but we'll see him next season, so it's okay. But oh man, Jesus Christ, what an episode. That was good. That was really good. It was really long. It was like a movie, basically. I really liked that part about it. There was so much to dive into here. Made for a really long breakdown and discussion. But I really enjoyed this. My wife did too. And I'm excited to see where we go next season. There's a lot of places that they can take this. They left us on another amazing cliffhanger. We have no idea what's going to happen with Mark and Ellie. I'm sure they'll write their way out of that somehow, find a way for them to survive. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where all of this goes. Yeah, I'm going to miss this show, man. Oh, I love this show so much. It's like my favorite show ever. But yeah, I'll be doing a few more videos on Severance, most likely, kind of breaking down what we got on the season as a whole. And then I'm going to jump over to The Last of Us Season 2. So hopefully stay tuned for that. If you like The Last of Us, that show's so good. They're doing such a good job. But yeah, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. I know it's valuable. Take it easy, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.